everyone. Welcome back to Design Uncensored by Path and Bound. My name is Stella Guan. I am the founder and CEO of Path and Bound. We are an online design school that has custom curriculums for students who want to transition their careers to become a designer, specifically on the visual and UI side. So in this particular program, we mostly talk about design industry issues that a lot of people don't dare to talk about. We have practically no filters, and we usually talk about it with our beloved guest, Carrie McPherson, who is a brilliant product designer who a few years ago transitioned his career successfully to design from another career. And he's a very passionate product person, and he has a lot to share with us. So we welcome him back with full enthusiasm. Hi, Carrie. How are you doing today?
Stella, you are too kind. Thank you for having me. I am doing fine. I'm doing fine.
Okay, well, hopefully the spirit gets up while we talk about more things today about specifically the type of projects that UX design boot camps kind of push for, and it results in one size fits all looking portfolio projects. So recently, you shared an article with me, which I thought it was really, really interesting and well written. It's called "Case Study Factories" by UX. I would say it's a UX magazine, online magazine on Medium, right? So it's a very well written article, and it has all these visuals and all these great tips. So we'd like to talk a little bit about that, and also there's a corresponding tweet thread that goes into advising students about what to do and what not to do in their portfolio. So we're going to talk about these two things first. Okay, so the article. What do you think of the article, first of all, when you shared it? Why did you share it with me?
I think that the article, the case study factory, is just super brilliant. And when you think about it, it is a case study on case study. So it's like super meta. I think it's really brilliant because he's not only pointing out the problem, but he's having like high level solutions where people can still create, a case study and even a portfolio that truly, reflects their personality, right? Their talent, their impact, instead of just another cookie cutter approach. And I think it's just really well written. And there was actual data pulled from hiring managers and people that's been doing this for a
Yeah,
long time and what they
definitely.
want to see in the portfolio.
Yeah, it's actually really eye-opening to see the hiring manager's quote, right? Obviously, a lot of students, they don't get to hear that because they're completely, they're not even at the stage of interviewing yet. So,
Yeah.
in the edited version of this video, we're definitely going to show some of the snippets of the hiring manager's quotes. And I think some of the quotes, it's interesting because they mention that they actually skip to the end first to see if the project is even worth looking at, because there's just so few time for a hiring manager to review a portfolio in depth. What do you think of that?
You know what? I actually saw this interesting post, and this is just for anyone listening to this. This is for product design roles, especially if you want to work for a well-known company. Actually came across this interesting post on LinkedIn by this guy that used to be a product design manager at Pinterest. And he said, by far, the number one reason candidates don't move forward in product design interviews is that they place too much emphasis on UX research methodologies, problem identification and process, and not enough on execution. And I found that to be, super true, especially for the product design role. And it seems like even when you read some of those quotes, right, in the case study factory, it's kind of the same thing that it's mainly focusing on your output and your outcomes versus the tools and frameworks that you use to get there, because it's not the story. And hiring managers are pretty much saying that in so many words, just like Fabricio had it in that article.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like, okay, you learn this in the design school, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with learning the process, and you do have to learn the process. But I kind of like to liken it to, okay, let's say you were enrolled in a school that teaches you how to write music, compose, right? You
Right.
learn the techniques in a couple of months and you practice it. But when you actually want to work as a music composer, you're not going to plagiarize. right? So you're not going to make
Right.
it sound like, oh, wait, where have I heard of this song before? Right? So you have to take what you learn and take the leap into the next stage and actually make it your own. So if people start seeing like, oh, ideate, define, right? Empathize, they're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we've seen this before. We know you are kind of stopping at the textbook stage and not really jumping to the next stage to make it truly your own. So you're going to be pretty much regarded as okay, you have some skills, but there are a ton of other people who have way more critical thinking and the ability to extrapolate and make it their own, that kind of ability than you, right? And it's interesting also, the article mentioned quotes from students who reflected back on what they've been told by the school. For
Hmm.
example, it says one of the students said publishing case studies on Medium, which is a very popular online publication platform, was a requirement from the school. We're encouraged to share our work on the platform and tag it in a certain way to increase our visibility and chances of getting hired. I thought that was really interesting because I personally write on Medium, our school write on Medium. And from day one, my understanding is Medium, it's a place for you to share thought provoking ideas, right? Ideas that may not get published by mainstream media. So if I go on Medium and I see case studies, I'm like, God, why would I want to read that? Right?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that these schools are kind of using students as a marketing mechanism and not teaching them the right, like if you want them to publish on Medium, fine, that's great. Teach them how to be a writer, how to be a journalist, and actually make it interesting. Well, yeah, what do you think of that?
So I want to go all the way back to the comparison that you use to a music composer because, for example, when you think about it, music composers they also have to work with people on the business side that know nothing about music composition, and they can't like even when they have their resume right, they can't just say, "Oh, I perform like Mixolydian scales and I know like this kind of chord changes right and music theory and all that kind of stuff." It's more on this is what I do. I made music for TV shows. I made music for films that a lot of people
Mhm.
still love today, and that got 30 million downloads off of iTunes because
Yeah,
now they're showing like their impact, right?
yeah,
Instead
yeah.
of just a blurb. Even if someone right wanted to compose for Beyonce or they
Mhm.
wanted to perform with Beyonce, they wouldn't go to her and say that, hey, I know all these different like music theory concepts and all these other
Yeah,
different things, and you have to
exactly.
Juilliard because it can only take you so far. But if you talk about your outcomes and say, hey, I create these kind of melodies, right? This is pretty much
Mhm.
the outcome of it. Then she would pay attention. As far as like boot camps, I think like a senior product designer told me at AT&T when I first reached out to him, they are for-profit organizations that don't care if you get a job or not, unfortunately, and they
Yeah.
are giving you like templated stuff that's like very diluted that anyone can use. So it kind of reminds me of like music. Like so for every decade, there's always a musical trend. Everyone hops on a bandwagon. It becomes super cookie cutter, like new metal in the early
Yes.
2000s, right? Of
Mhm.
course, you had like your Korn, your Slipknots, your Rage Against the Machines, right? That was kind of leading the way. But then you just had like a bunch of copy and paste cookie cutter crap that was going on during that time. And it began in that style completely faded out, right? When you
Yeah.
think about it. And even when you think about rap, it's kind of the same thing. How a lot of rappers sound cookie cutter today. They sound
Mhm.
like one another in the
They
mainstream.
do.
And think about user experience that way, right? And I even remember in Double XL, they actually gave this album called Hell Have No Fury by this group called Clips a perfect score. And I remember the journalist saying that, well, maybe Clips should thank, the record label for, postponing their album for that many years because it gave Clips enough time to really hone their craft, right? And while
Yeah.
other rappers are putting out cookie cutter albums with, the fear of their spot being missed, this is built to last pretty much. So it's like similar to my portfolio. Their portfolio is pretty much old. And even when I, interviewed for LinkedIn, one of the hiring managers wanted to look at my portfolio and go through it. And I told her that it's old. And she was like, wow, that's really impressive. That, that's like concept work in a sense. So I just think it In my opinion, I think a portfolio, it does take a lot of work. Even the the generic ones that we see all the time, it's still a lot of work that people put
Yes,
into it.
absolutely.
But if you put that extra effort and you pay attention to really great curated portfolios and case studies that's out there, not even just from like designers, right, but from agencies and from all these other different places, it's going to pay dividends. Even when you start to progress in your career, it's going to pay dividends. And I can speak to that because I just started a new job making a lot of money. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad I brought up the music analogy since I know that's your background. And hopefully it resonates with a lot of folks here as well. We're not just talking about things theoretically, but analogy always helps. So in this case study factory article, obviously they try to provide value as well. Instead of just criticizing, what's going on out there, they did have a 7-step process in the end, which I thought it was really good and interesting and definitely very valuable. So I'm just going to quickly go through those 7, like the titles, so that we can quickly go through that. So the first one they recommend designers doing is define your area of focus. That brings back to my point earlier in our conversation as well. Is we probably already know this. We're not for everyone. You can't
Yeah.
try to be a designer for every company, for every possible hiring managers, even though that's very tempting because you cast a wider net, right? But in reality is you can't. So learn who you are first. That's a tough question, but because you have a few months if you enrolled in a boot camp, if you start studying. So ask yourself that question again and again in the process. And then second, align the story with the medium. That's very interesting because everywhere that you post your case studies or post your portfolio, you have to understand you can't just copy and paste. You have to
Yeah.
think of the audience. For example, they said if you put it out on medium.com, that means people are there quickly to glance what's really interesting about this case study. So don't bore them with a lot of details. But if you put it in your own portfolio site, you can go into more details. You can show more of the process. Of course, you have more freedom to do whatever you want in your own personal website, right? But if you put it on Dribble, that's a totally different story because that means you're literally showing the UI instead of the process. So choose your medium wisely and target it. And number 4, focus on insights rather than the process. I think that's so valuable, which is what we are talking about here. It's okay, instead of the templated methodologies that we can all learn and just copy and paste from online for free, how about you tell us, why should I even read your case study? What's so
Yeah.
interesting? And it's so simple as relating yourself kind of in the position of a reader versus a journalist, right? A journalist really want to catch your eyes. If you create a video on YouTube, if you have a uninteresting title, people are not going to watch it. So really pay attention to that. And then 5, focus your case study reading experience. Now, that one, I find it very ironic myself because if you're not able to even present your case studies in a really interesting, readable format with callouts, with visual aid, without too much text, are you really a designer? Because it means that you're ignoring the experience of the person who's reading your case study, right? And then number
Right.
6, obsess over your case study visuals. So this one, we're going to debate that because the tweet that we're going to talk about later, they kind of have a contentious point about this. So obviously, if your product, if your final visual sucks, right? It's not going to get yourself a leg up in a lot of scenarios. So that we'll discuss a little bit later. And number 7, make it personal. That's the last step. And I love that because make it personal means adding that extra personality into your case studies, into your entire branding, so that people don't forget about you because they read 500 of them. And if you even intrigue them a little bit by being a little different, you have a way leg up. And I think, Carrie, you did that very well. So, of the process that we just mentioned in a really quick way, what do you think of it in general?
I think those are really, in my opinion, really great steps. I think that that's really a baseline that someone should set the foundation for their case studies on. I think the first one, really aligning, really finding your area of focus. And I want to go further, a little bit further on that, because I think it's extremely important, is that you need to understand what kind of industries you want to work for. And sometimes I run into product designers that reach out to me, well, aspiring product designers, and they said, well, I don't know what kind of companies I want to work for, right? And it's almost like, yes, you do, because I'm pretty sure you use an app or you use some kind of
Right.
appliance or something because someone
Yeah.
designed it, right? So I think, for example, like really just being cognizant. So if you hate visual design, if you hate strategy, but you want to work at Instagram, that's not going to be a good fit. You need to be more realistic, right? If
Right.
you love visual design, but you hate complex flows, then you're not
Yeah.
going to want to work for somewhere, a company like Salesforce or even
Hmm.
Microsoft, because that's
Yep.
not going to be a good fit at all, right? And I think that when you, or if you, let's say, for example, maybe you love like enterprise software. Maybe you also love visual design and you're a craft. Hey, there's a great company called Dropbox that offers both of those happy mediums, right? That you
Yep.
can join. So really being cognizant of the kind of role that you want to go into, the kind of industries that you want to work for, so you can appeal to those kind of people. Because if you want to work somewhere like Meta or Headspace, right, or Instagram, then yes, you do have to be really great at your visual craft because it's table stakes for those companies when you think about it. And I think when you can ask yourself, who am I designing this for? How do I want to make people feel after they leave my case study as well? When people view my case study, am I providing enough context as well? What's going to make me stand out and what's really going to appeal to hiring managers? And when I have conversations with mentors, am I asking them the right questions? Because if you're asking someone to, hey, can you take a look at my portfolio? That's really vague because
Yeah.
now it's like, what do you want me to talk about? The
Yeah.
typography, the layout, right? The content itself, your UI design itself, right? The Just other different stuff, right? Like your portfolio in general, on your introduction, right? Your intro, your catch line, the about me page, the formatting, right? All this kind of stuff. And it's like this super vague, and we can talk about this all day. And I can give you a bunch of notes that can last for hours. But if you're really specific and you're saying, hey, I want you to look at this, I want you to tell me if this makes sense, if you glance this, and if you would have an interview with me after you saw it, those are, the kind of questions that you need to ask. And if you're a hiring manager, once again, would you, pick up the phone, right? Would you have a recruiter schedule time with me? And that's why people have folks they have folks steering them in like 20 or 50 directions because they're not asking the right questions. And like you mentioned, they're trying to cast a wide net. And I think just by following all of these different steps in the case study factory and figuring out, okay, what steps are best for me, right? What's going to resonate with me the most? And how can I fit some of these steps right into the narrative that I'm trying to sell and tell to a company?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you mentioned some designers when you ask them what kind of companies you want to work for, they have no idea. I think it's the same thing as okay, if you want to save time when you go out shopping, it's really best to have a shopping list rather than
Yeah.
oh, I don't know what I'm looking for, and then you're going to spend hours and hours wandering around, maybe getting nothing. So it's kind of the same thing. If you go into a job market not knowing what you want, you're like, oh, let me just submit my resumes to 150 companies. You're not going to get anything because of those 150 companies, everyone is going to look at you like, well, this person's fine. But there are other people that literally targeted and tailored their portfolio and their resume to us that really speaks and resonates with us. We're going to go with them. Right. So I think,
Hmm.
that's probably why some of these designers are having trouble because one, they don't even know what they want. And their intention is good because they want to get something, anything, their foot in the door. That's a great mentality, but lacking strategy. So I think that one that you brought up is really valuable.